holy shit. And there was this huge craft, UFO. It's the only thing you can call it. It was huge, and it was like a burnt, vibrant orange red. It was huge. It took up the whole lake. It was just giant. And we were so scared. We started crying, and my father wanted to chase it, and my mother's going, Joey, don't. And the only thing that I can remember after that was him starting to chase it and then levitating over Berkshire Heights myself.
That's not what brought your attention to it. It was the odd colors that were just hovering quietly and silently in the space there. And as our car actually came to a roll or a stop, all of a sudden, what I remember was like the sounds of tapping stones underneath the fender wall, like a tap, 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 tap. And then it was like we were underwater.
My Alien Life is recorded live from atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is available on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is at www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you will find my email address, all previously recorded shows, and more. I'm Cameron Logan. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Three, two, one, zero, and liftoff.
In 1969, in a small community in Berkshire County, Massachusetts, there was an invasion. Let's just call it what it was. On September 1st, it seemed a small community was under siege by aliens, and that's all you really need to know. Tonight, 3 members of the town that has been deemed the first and only UFO incident to be inducted into a U.S. state as historically true. That and more, coming right up on My Alien Life.
I am a local journalist and historian. I come from a different part of the county, but the newspapers that I work for cover all of Berkshire County. That includes southern Berkshire, where Sheffield is located. With a features department in the Berkshire Eagle, and we have a magazine called Upcountry Magazine, which I'm the editor of.
And she's been covering this, how long, Jennifer? Like 40, 50 years now? I mean, you've been writing for how long?
Jennifer's like 27.
I'm like 40, 42.
You look fantastic. By the way, that's Tom Reed, and Tom, you grew up there, right?
Oh yeah, we. My God. Well, actually, if I might as well give you the whole backstory here. I didn't actually. I didn't live there till I was 3. My grandmother was the governess for Franklin Delano Roosevelt's grandchildren in Cherry Hills, Colorado.
Right.
Then I lived in their property until 1963, which is why how I guess my family became a little bit interested in politics, which plays a huge part in this later on. And so with that said, yeah, I moved to Sheffield in 1963. My brother was born there, or in Great Barrington, actually, at Fairview Hospital.
So at the age of 3, you're actually considered a short timer and out of towner there, probably still.
Oh, we were out of towners for sure, and that played a part also. Yeah.
And Jennifer, fill us back in. You started covering the story and got interested in this when?
So I've been following the story for about a dozen years. But I worked at a different paper before, the North Adams Transcript, which was merged with the Berkshire Eagle. But I cover a lot of, I would call them, paranormal things. Like if there's something weird that happens in the Berkshires, they give it to me because I like it. And I write a lot of columns on folklore, and so this is how I got involved. And so yeah, I cover a lot of stuff that deals with the paranormal, hauntings, UFO sightings, stuff like that.
My name is Melanie Kirchdorfer, and I'm part of Tom Reed's story. You're going to think I'm crazy, but I'm not. This really does happen. And some of the podcasts. Now, I'm not nuts, but I have this energy thing that happens, and it usually takes place around the full moon. It's bizarre, and can happen between the new moon and the full moon, and the new moon is on the 13th. I shut down computers and televisions and all these electrical things. In fact, I literally shut down one of the podcasts.
But she goes back.
I have a lot of contacts within the communities.
You do a lot of research, though. I mean, some of the stuff that you have come up with involving our case, I mean, is stuff that we never hear about. We've been trying to find answers for things, and bang, Jennifer's been fantastic. She pulls up something, goes, here it is. I mean, she's got access to the archives and the Berkshire Eagle and things like that. So there are things that she can pull up that the lion's share of us can't, and some of the information that I think we're going to share with you tonight is going to be the first time it's ever been broadcast.
This happened all throughout my childhood, actually. It started, I can remember when I was 4 years old, it all started to happen. The big, huge event was the 69 event that everyone really focuses on, but it happened before then, and it happened to a lot of other people that I know before then. Jennifer did a lot of research, and she really knows. I believe that she knows why it happened. I think that she hit the nail on the head why it went on. But my sister and I, we were working that day or working that whole weekend. We had to work. And that particular weekend, my parents wanted us to go for ice cream. Do you want me to tell you the whole story? Is that what you'd like?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we both worked at the Mahawi Theater, and after working that weekend, we cleaned the Mahawi Theater. 2 young girls. I was 12. My sister was 14. She was going into high school that year. And we did not want to go out for ice cream because back then in 1969, it was very normal for a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old to smoke cigarettes. People today go, oh, you smoke cigarettes? But you did. It was normal back then. We didn't act like 12 and 14-year-olds do today. It was a totally different world back then. You worked. You paid board. You did different things than a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old do today in the 1960s. It was totally different. You had veterans coming home from Vietnam hanging out in the park back then. We acted older. Your parents really didn't know where you were. You were running around wild. So they did want to know where we were that day. And they put us in the car and said, you're coming with us. So we went, and they took us out for ice cream. We did not want to go, but we went, and we ended up at Lake Mansfield with our ice cream. And the next thing we knew, my father, excuse my language, he said, holy shit. And there was this huge craft, UFO. It's the only thing you can call it. It was huge, and it was like a burnt, vibrant orange red. It was huge. It took up the whole lake. It was just giant. And we were so scared. We started crying, and my father wanted to chase it, and my mother's going, Joey, don't. And the only thing that I can remember after that was him starting to chase it and then levitating over Berkshire Heights myself. My family was no longer with me. Now, one thing people don't understand, because I've had people question me, they'll say, well, how is it that your parents weren't with you when you woke up? They don't remember. They don't remember what happened either. But I woke up, the last thing I could remember after levitating, you can't move when you're levitating like that. You cannot move. It's only your eyes that can move. I remember waking up, and I was on a table in a room, and it was like it was a metallic room. I don't remember anybody being in that room. I just remember being in a metallic room. It was almost like a glass metallic, or like an industrial metallic room. Am I making sense to you?
Absolutely.
And then I don't know what they did to me. I have no idea. I don't know whether it was a spaceship that I was on. That's why I don't know exactly what happened. I wish I knew what happened, but I don't know exactly what happened. And then I remember being in another room with a bunch of young people, young kids, and they weren't adults. They were all different ages. I did not know any of them. Tom Warner said that he saw me, but I don't remember seeing him. I did not know him at the time. And they just disappeared one by one by one. And then I woke up on the beach at Lake Mansfield. And this was hours later. It was like right before, just as the sun is starting to come up in like September, the Labor Day weekend. And I still try and remember what time that would be, because I raise chickens. I live on a farm in the middle of the woods. And I still, when I go out to feed them, I try and think what time that would be when the sun's coming up. It has to be, you don't look at a watch when something like that takes place, because you're traumatized. So you're not going to look at a watch and say, oh, I was gone for such and such a time. Of course you're not. You're too little. And I remember what I was wearing. That I remember. I remember I had a lime green sweatshirt on, because it was like my favorite sweatshirt, and cut off jeans. And I had really bad stomach pains, and I had to walk home, but it wasn't that far to walk home, because it was just a couple of streets over. And people go, well, how could you walk home at that age? We used to do it all the time. It was not a big deal to walk that far, because it was so close. And my mom, who always locked the door was unlocked that night, which is bizarre, because she always locks the doors. And I remember crawling in bed with my sister, because we had a big brass bed that we shared, and waking her up, and she hugged me, and, we talked about it. But she still, to this day, we talk about it, and she says, I don't remember how we got home. They don't remember. We just don't remember how they got home. And it wasn't for years and years that we weren't supposed to talk about it. We were told not to talk about it, that it was a shooting star, and that the little gray man that used to come into my room was all in my head. I made it up, but my sister saw it too. And then finally my mom called me about 3 years ago, going on 4 now, and said I needed to go to the Historical Society and tell them my story. And I said, what are you talking about? You told me that this was all in my head, that I made all this up. And she said, oh no, it was true. And I'm like, what do you mean it's true? Because she brainwashed me into believing that I had made all this stuff up, And then I had to go for PTSD hypnosis for like 10 weeks. in order. I was shocked when she finally came forward and told me the truth on all of this. So when you go for hypnosis, you don't go one time.
Right.
And they hypnotize you. You have to go to prepare yourself to be hypnotized. And they don't do it until like the fourth time to see if you can even handle what you're going to see, because it's like looking at a film of your life. It's frightening. It's really scary. And even today, bits and pieces of my life back then will come back. Like a song that my mom would sing to me when I was 3 or 4 will come back to me out of the blue. And I'll call my sister up and I'll sing it to her. And she'll be like, oh, how do you remember that? And I'll say, it's the hypnosis. Or she'll call me and she'll say, Mom and I, we were talking about such and such, and she told me to call you because we know you'll remember it. And I'll say, well, I don't remember now, but it will come to me, and it comes right back to me now. But the bad thing is that it severed my relationship with my parents because of the lies. That's the sad part that came of all of this. But they claim that it was to protect me because they didn't want people to think I was crazy.
And Tom mentioned to me earlier, and we were just chatting just for briefly when I first connected with you both, that I mentioned the word invasion. And I know this has been happening for years. And for a better word, I mean, if I looked up synonyms in Google, it would give me nothing less than drama, if you wanted to match the word invasion. And so there it is, Tom. And to me, it was a big deal because, I mean, also that who's joined us, of course, is Melanie, who has a big role in this, in the whole story of this event in 1969. But we don't really know yet, right, how many people were involved, because I know that since then and just recently, because you've been seen on TV, you've been seen on YouTube, and you've been podcasted, and you've been vlogged and everything else. People are now coming out of the woodwork and identifying themselves as the victims, participants, whatever you want to call it, in this quote unquote, what I quoted, invasion.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what I was trying to, my focus was, back in the day, my parents had a diner in town, and it was where most of the talk came from, mostly, those who had seen things, the children of the area had drawn what they had seen and taped them to the chalkboard in school and discussed them on the school bus. And they were obviously getting a hard time from other children who were more local, I guess you could say, because it was a growing area from New Yorkers. So there's a mix of personalities. And my mother was like a surrogate mother to these kids. I mean, she would give them extra quarters for the jukebox and, make sure they had French fries and that sort of thing. And the park is kind of an extension of that. It's an extension of this judgment-free area, if you will. And because of that, some of the shows have been filming there, and it's been bringing a lot of attention to the area, and a lot of the locals who wouldn't have normally had a voice or had an opportunity to express themselves or come forward and feel comfortable doing so. I think it's all just kind of fallen into place, and it's given the Melanies and many other people an opportunity to just feel more comfortable and speaking about what they remembered.
Right. And one of the things that, let me just explain first that you may not know much about me, but I know a lot about you both. And so I've been prior to Christmas, maybe Thanksgiving, this is a story that I started following, and I knew about it for a very, very long time, but I started, it started to pop back up on my YouTube feed. And so I found out about you two and started looking into you two. And then just really, I was thinking about Tom, and literally I was telling Jennifer earlier that Tom messaged me, and it blew my mind. And which that happens a lot with me. However, this story really intrigues me. Number one, Tom, I love your story because I mean you're the kid in town. Your parents are the center of the community. They have this diner, and that is so cool. And you were involved, and then later on, you know, this reporter comes along, and it's Jennifer, and she's amazing. And so, you know, there's a lot there, and there's a lot to fill in. There's a lot to pick up where Jennifer first started doing her research. And so if you would, Tom, just kind of guide us through the story and that night in 1969, where were you and what happened?
Well, I was actually at a ski resort now called Ski Butternut. Back in the day, they used to have 4-H horse shows there, and I was actually riding in a horse show, which is actually still written in the newspapers to this day. You can still find it. And for that particular day, September 1st, and we had, it was a hot day. We decided to call it quits and head home. And my mother had because it was a holiday, had the cook closing up late. And so she went back with me and my grandmother and my brother to, do the, empty the cash register, those things that you do to make sure it's okay in the morning and ready to go. And what's important about that is that we actually had stopped at a store called Silks, which is still there to this day. And my grandmother had gone in and grabbed a couple of things for the house, and we were heading home, and we decided to take a shortcut through the Sheffield Bridge. And my mother liked the drive, I guess, and it was like I said, it was a warm night. It was a clear night. It was probably in the 80s, which is actually really hot for a September night in New England. And so the windows were open, and all these things kind of just play a part. So there was no glare on the glass. We had no air conditioning in the car back then. So the windows were open. We're sitting in the station wagon and going through the bridge. And the first thing that my grandmother had mentioned, she was in the passenger seat, that there seemed to be some light coming through the planks of the boards in front of the car, which didn't make sense with the headlights. She didn't actually tell us at the moment, but she told us later. And as we came up the backside of the bridge, we were only going about maybe 15 miles an hour. It was a very bumpy bridge and potholes and the dirt road. I mean, you couldn't go very fast. And as we exited the bridge, on the left side, the driver's side of the car, there was a white sphere that was, I try to reference things in a way that it's easy for people to comprehend. But if you take a Volkswagen Beetle and times it by 4, it was a pretty good sized sphere. And it looked like it rose from the banks of the water. I never said it was under the water. I don't even know if it was under the bridge. All I know is it was rising up from the water. And what I'm looking at this thing out the back window, and it had these rods of light, I guess, that just kind of shot from the sides of it into the Housatonic River. And Ancient Aliens did a pretty good job on it. It kind of, at some point, it almost looked like an ice cream cone or a sugar cone, the way it fired these lights or rods of light. I'm getting a lot of background noise, by the way, just so you know. With that said, it just kind of, at that point, it looked like a solid cue ball. It wasn't putting off a bleed. It was just like a solid white light, almost like a 2-watt light bulb. But that just kind of was self-contained. And it started to rise up and go in the same direction that we were, down this dirt road. And there's a lot of trees there to this day. They're a lot bigger now, obviously, but it was going behind this line of trees in the same direction we were. My brother was kind of looking around also from the passenger side of the car and saw another sphere very similar to this one, but much smaller, but also over water, where the river kind of took a turn, maybe 100 yards or so off to the right side of the car. So there were actually 2 of them, and they were both over water. Now, the one on the right that my brother saw more clearly, he tells me that was more like a rolling or like a sun or like an orange, almost like a wave of movement within an orange and yellow. And that was a color that a lot of people have witnessed that night, even Melanie, that this orangey glow was seen. And so with that, we continued down this dirt road to a clearing. My mother actually was driving up where there was a spot to pull over near a telephone pole to see if we could spot this white sphere that we had first seen on the left of the car, which has now kind of disappeared, if you will, behind a line of trees or was hard to spot. And so we sat at this clearing on, this again, only maybe 60, 70 yards or so from the bridge itself. And bang, all of a sudden we all saw this large, like, shell. And I've referenced like a turtle shell because it didn't have, a lot of like windows or landing gear or all the stuff you hear about. It wasn't shiny and, Hollywood looking. It actually looked like a turtle shell, like this faint shell that was about 100 yards. I mean, this thing was not little. I was little as a child, but my mother, my grandmother, all of us agree, even Jan Green and Melanie, we all agree that this thing was the size of a football field. And the shell of it, the skin of it, if you will, actually put off its own sheen, which again was like an orangey gold. Now, when I saw it, I only remember seeing the colors, if you will, or the sheen. Sphere itself was putting out a white, but the craft, which was like 100 yards in size, were putting off like a white sheen underneath it. But the top of the shell itself was putting out like an orange and gold bleed of light off to one side of it, which was towards the front side of our car. The left side of it, I don't remember. You lose it a little bit in the darkness of the night. And the bottom of it, again, had a small little bleed of light. But that's not what brought your attention to it. It was the odd colors that were just hovering quietly and silently in the space there. And as our car actually came to a roll or a stop, all of a sudden, what I remember was like the sounds of tapping stones underneath the fender wall, like a tap, 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 tap. And then it was like we were underwater. My mother, has mentioned in Unsolved Mysteries that it felt like a heavy vacuum of air, was kind of pushing against her chest. And for me, I remember like when I was swimming, in the pool later on, how you hear a tapping echoes, but everything else is muted. It was very similar to that. And so we're looking at this thing, and all of a sudden we feel very different. Like this, we were in like a vacuum of some kind, and it was silent, and the next thing there's the car gets like engulfed in light. I remember I could see the inside the car, the dashboard, the radio, my back of my mother's head, the seats. And it wasn't like a blinding light, like someone had a flashlight in your face. It was just all of a sudden, it was like daylight. It wasn't like a dome light. It was just like extremely bright with this odd pressure around you and this, inability to really move a lot. It was just weird. And we all experienced that. And then there was this moment where everything kind of came back to normal. And there was like an eruption of cicadas and crickets and frogs. Whatever this was, it kind of like hit us, and altered everything for maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes. And then bang, it was just like normal again. And then the environment itself just came to life, just everything erupted, just came to life again. And then bang, we're not in the car anymore, and so, people have asked me, what, how did you get out of the car? What happened? I don't know. I have a lot of strange memories from that night of an airplane hangar, long hallways, and a room that had what reminded me of an autopsy table, and just a lot of hard to digest thoughts or memories. But what's important really is when we got back in the car, or we were returned to the car, or placed back in the vehicle, whoever that was, my mother and grandmother were reversed, and the car was now shut off. The ignition was off. And while we were sitting there looking at this thing, the car was running. The headlights were on. We had no intentions of shutting the car off. We were actually looking at this thing through the windows of a car that was running. And so with that said, my grandmother was the first one to come to. She was in the driver's seat now. She drove down the road maybe, I don't know, 100 yards or so, turned the car around and went shooting back to Silks, where we had just been. At least she thought we had just been. Come to find out, they were closing. And we had, basically lost 2.5 to 3 hours worth of, time there. I mean, when we left, we were going home for bed. It was like 8:30 or so, which is also interesting because Melanie's incident at Lake Mansfield took place around 8. So this is about a half an hour after Melanie's incident. Gone from the car the same time Melanie was gone from her car, which is also interesting because they were in a car with a family in it. We were in a car with a family in it, and we were both kind of gone at the same time. But with that said, when we got to Silk's, my grandmother pulled up to Silk's store. My brother, according to my grandmother, his head was on my right knee. My mother was unconscious, and I was out. My grandmother went into Silk's for help. It was the store next to our diner. And when she got out, I guess, we all kind of guessed at this point that when the door slammed, it kind of, for some reason, jarred me, being that I was right behind the door. And I kind of woke up, and I remember seeing my grandmother through the windshield of the station wagon, and my mom was not responding. My brother was out. So I had gotten out of the car instead of running to my grandmother, like, Nana, that kind of thing, as a kid did. And I followed her into the store where she was going for help. Nobody was responding to her. So she was nervous, not thinking really clearly. We were all kind of in a funk. And so she walked right by the clerk, though, at the time, and went right smack into the back of the store. And then when she went to talk to the individual there, I don't think she knew what to say because a paramedic never showed up, an officer never showed up, nobody ever came. She just kind of sat there and lost her words, I guess, and shaken. And my mother at that point had come to, and so I guess with us, awake now, if you will, or coherent, she opted to just get in the car and go home and take us home.
But it didn't protect me. It hurt me because they all wanted me to think I was crazy.
Right. Can you give me the lay of the land and what the area looked like at the time, the lake, the river, and the town, so people can get a visual of what the area was like? And was it a tourist spot? Because it's not a huge lake, but it's a really beautiful spot of America.
Well, people probably wouldn't have thought of it as being a tourist area back then, but it really was. I mean, we had friends back then that would come up from New York City because the train ran from New York to Great Barrington back then. And I remember people coming up on the train from New York back then. And a lot of people had cottages up on Lake Buell back then. And so there were a lot of people that would come up, and a lot of people, there were a lot of quote unquote, it was the era of the hippies. There were a lot of hippies that hung out in Great Barrington, and a lot of Vietnam vets would hang out in the park behind the town hall that were coming home from the war. And it was quite a spot. We had the drop-in center that we would hang out in. There were a lot of artists, a lot of musicians, and it was a fun place to grow up. And we also had a lot of great films that were coming out in the late 60s, a lot of wonderful films that were coming out in 1969. And because my sister and I worked there, we got to see them all at a very young age, at 12 and 14. We were able to see these movies. And my mom, I don't think she was paying attention as to what we were able to see at such a young age. I mean, you remember what was coming out, Cactus Flower, Midnight Cowboy, all those movies were coming out then. Some great films, and the music was wonderful back then. And there was a lot going on, and there was a lot of UFO activity. There was a lot of UFO activity up at East Mountain, and all of this was taking place along the Housatonic River. It was all taking place around Lake Mansfield. All of these incidents seem to have been taking place around water, always around water. There's something to do with the water in this area. And I think that Jennifer, she's got it all figured out about why it was going on in this
And I know
area.
she did a lot of research, and it's good to have somebody like that because it kind of verifies, some of the things that you went through because you're able to hear other stories from other people. Do you remember at the time, the day after or the week after, was the town just abuzz? Was everybody talking about it, or were they keeping it to themselves?
I remember just being punished. I mean, I got locked in the basement for talking about these things. I was called Trouble. They had all sorts of nicknames for me, my family. I was just told that I needed to keep my mouth shut. I had to shut up. I was the bad one. I mean, my sister talks about it to this day. She said, "Wow, you really took the brunt end of everything, Melanie. I'm really sorry." I was just I had to keep my mouth shut. I couldn't talk about it. And sometimes even now, it's like it's therapy for me to talk about it. But then again, sometimes people will look at me still, the non-believers, and think I'm nuts. But then I'll meet someone like Jennifer that's done all the research, and she makes me feel so much better. Like, it's okay, Melanie. I think it could have happened. I think this really did happen. But when you have people like your own mother and father saying, you're trouble, I saw it too, but you can't talk about it. It's very hurtful. It's very hurtful. And my sister even said to my mom, "But Mom, I saw that man. I saw that little man that used to come in and take Melanie out of the room and levitate her. I saw it myself." And I mean, they would put locks on the attic door, which aren't going to do any good because you can't keep these things out of your room when you put a lock on your door.
Right.
They're going to come in anyways. But they just don't want to listen to you. And then I find out later that a friend of mine, she told me that the same thing was happening to her sister a street over at the same time. I find this out last year. So it was happening. It was happening in the same town. And then I found out, and this man had no way of knowing what happened to me levitating over Berkshire Heights because they never talked about it on the Unsolved Mystery film. It was cut out. It landed on the cutting floor. He called me from California. He used to live up on Berkshire Heights, and he had the same thing happen to him up on Berkshire Heights. So this was happening to other children. They had no way of knowing that it was happening to me. But after Netflix came out, they started telling me about the same little gray men that were doing the same thing to them in Great Barrington. So there were other people that knew these were going on, but the parents weren't talking about it.
Right.
That's pretty bizarre.
So floating through the air, and when you were in the craft, was there fear at all, or were you scared out of your mind, or was it the exact opposite? What'd you feel like?
You're petrified. I didn't want to go to school. I never wanted to go to school. I would pretend I was going to school, and I'd go out the door, and I'd go around the block, and I'd hide on my back porch. I was always afraid. I was afraid of everything. It wasn't even until I would get into high school. No, I would say, I take that back. Excuse me. I was in middle school when I met my first boyfriend that I had any type of a life, I would say, when I felt comfortable. And I was working, and then I would say after that incident, it stopped. It started slowing down. That was the big incident that it really stopped happening. I had one more incident up here that it happened, and I don't remember exactly what happened. All I remember is waking up, and there was a huge bright light around my house, and I couldn't wake anyone in the house up. I couldn't wake my animals up. I couldn't wake any of the children up in the house. I couldn't wake my husband up. That was the last time it ever happened. But I would say that 69 incident was the last time that they bothered me. So I was able to pretty much move on. I left home at 17 at a very young age. I was out of there, and I moved on in my life and just never talked about it. I never talked about it to anyone, except for my boyfriend, my sister, my husband that I'm married to now. He always knew about it, and my very close friends always knew about it. But that's it. Like my friend Lely, she knew about it. My friend Stephanie, my children knew about it. But other than that, you just didn't talk about it. People thought you would be nuts.
So how many people do you estimate went through some sort of similar event that same night? Maybe seeing a UFO, maybe being abducted. Did they ever do a head count? Did you ever do a head count?
I'm finding more and more people it happened to. You know, I'm not on Facebook right now. I got off of Facebook during the whole election thing, but I plan on going back after. But I had people that were contacting me after the film came out. So many people were telling me that it had happened to them. And my husband's out more than I am. I really pretty much keep to myself. I'm a painter and I have my grandson a lot. I'm also, I garden, I farm, and I have my dogs. I'm really reclusive. So he's out and about, and people tell him. My husband, he sees a lot of people that have told him that they saw this happen on 69. He has talked to probably 4 or 5 people. And then I've talked to people that had it happen to them as children in this area that are my age. I also talked to another woman that's my age. Her father was in the military, and she had the same thing happen to her and described the same little man or creature. It happened to her in New Mexico in a cave. It was exactly the same thing that I described. And I mean, she was angry. I'm scared. She starts crying and she becomes furious when she talks about what happened to her. But she won't talk to anybody besides me and her friends about it. Like, she wouldn't, I doubt that she would come on a radio station or a podcast and talk about it because she has an anger over it. Mine is really just more of a fear and a sadness because of what happened, because of not being believed by, well, no, not that I wasn't believed, but because I was believed because my parents saw it, but not being believed when I was little. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, exactly.
Because when they did see it, when I was 12, I knew they were coming for me that night. And that's when I said to my father, don't chase it. And my mother was saying, don't, Joey, don't, Joey. I was like shocked because I knew they were coming for me that night. I knew they were. I knew what was going on.
So, can you describe the general appearance of the craft? Was it cigar shaped, or were you looking at the edge of it of a big disc?
It was so huge, and being 12 years old, I just really remember that there were, like, in the middle part, there's strange colors going around in the middle part of it. But it was mostly a huge, huge orange, red, bronze glow. I just remember the fiery, fiery glow around it mainly. And you're in such shock, and your heart is beating like AFib, that you're traumatized. You can't move. You just cannot move.
Right. Do you think it was? Do you think that paralysis was because of something they did to you, or just fear in itself?
I think it's a combination. I think you have no control. And I think sometimes it still happens. I know I have this weird sense of mental telepathy or psychic. For instance, all week, I'll be thinking of somebody that I haven't even heard of or seen in like 40 years. This has happened to me all week long, and this person will call out of the blue. It's happened 3 times this week. It's bizarre.
Interesting.
And H said to me, what's going on with you this week? You know, we had someone from Oregon call. We had another woman he ran into tonight. And then there was one other person. I can't remember who the other person, but there were 3 people this week. It'll come to me. But it was bizarre, and I said, "What's going to happen next?" I said, "My psychic powers are really flying this week." And then I looked on the calendar, and I saw the 13th is the new moon coming, and I said, "Oh God, it's happening again." So it's bizarre, the things that happen, what they've left me with, for sure.
You said you woke up. Where exactly was that? So you were abducted and you were put back in the same place. Was that on the north end of the lake or the south end?
It was right where my parents were. We were in the parking lot, but they left me on the beach. I did a painting of it. I did a watercolor of it.
So at the time, that probably would have been the south end of the lake by Nob Hill Road, maybe.
Right.
Interesting.
It was right where did you see the yes theory?
I did, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was right there where I was walking.
Right.
It was right there. It looks different now than it did back then because it seems smaller. But of course, I was a child then, so of course it would seem bigger back then. It seems smaller now.
Right, and I thought that was an interesting presentation they put together, the yes theory, just because it really was the meat of the whole situation and condensed into a really easy to digest story, and they did a great job. So hopefully I can do the same. One thing They were
a great team. They were really good, and I can't believe they even got me to go up there because I will not go up there. I don't like going there. It frightens me to go up there.
Well, and I remember you saying that too, and it's a tough thing. I mean, any kind of trauma that you have to deal with over and over again, especially if people have questions and you'll never know what question they're going to ask that could trigger some memory that you don't even want to deal with at the time. So I understand that.
Well, Tom Reed has been very helpful because he has said to me, Melanie, because I was not going to do any radio shows at all. He said to me, I think it's good for you. It's like therapy for you to talk about it. And you're still here. Nothing bad has happened to you, really. And I said, well, when you start blowing up television sets, refrigerators, microwave ovens, I actually, when I got struck by lightning, I was knocked out for 3.5 hours. Our exchange student found me down in the basement. My 2 dogs were knocked out as well. And we had an underground fence line for the dogs that was blown off the wall like shrapnel. And one of my dogs died like 6 months afterwards. And it had to have been from being struck by lightning because she was only 4 years old. She was a young dog. And they're not even really sure what she died from. But so it's not like nothing happened from it.
Right.
Yeah, it isn't a fun thing. It's not a fun thing at all. So, yes, it is good to talk about it. It is good to sometimes do this, but it wasn't a pleasant event at all. Some people say, oh, I really wish I could be abducted. I think it would be fun. It's not a fun thing.
I've heard that, and I can't even imagine. No, it is not a fun thing. And I've never really talked to too many people who had a good time, but there are those, and there are those exceptions. And so, it ranges from your experience to all kinds of different experiences. But either way, I would put that way down on the bottom of my bucket list for sure. For sure.
I think that I have 2 theories, though. I either think that it's government related, that it could be the government is involved with it, or like I've traveled a lot in my life to the different ruins in Mexico and Belize. And like the First Nations people believe, the indigenous peoples believe, I do think that maybe they're trying to give us a message that we're destroying the earth, Mother Earth. And we need to be a little bit more sensitive about how we're treating the earth.
Yeah, it's
that were destroying it.
definitely that's happening. When you woke up in the morning, though, when after this happened, you said it sounded like it was right when the sun was coming up. Were you aware of anything like birds chirping when you woke up, or?
The only thing that I can remember is being in a lot of pain. I had a lot of stomach pain, and that's what I remember the most. And that's what my sister talks to me about too. She remembers me talking about how my stomach hurt so bad. She can remember that.
Any idea what that was caused by, and did you get a medical examination for it?
I remember as a child, my father always bringing me to the doctors for stomach pains a lot as a child. Because I remember, it's funny because my husband, Henry, we talked about this a lot after we met, how I used to go to a doctor. My father would take me to a doctor in Housatonic all the time, who had an office with a grandfather clock in it. And ironically, he used to go to the same doctor. And that's why my father would take me there all the time, because I would have these horrible stomach pains. And it was always after this little gray man episode would happen, down in Great Barrington. So I don't know what they were doing to me. I have no idea what they were doing to me. I had to have I don't know exactly what the doctor said, but I had to have a sinus surgery too. And the doctor made some comment to my husband about my sinus surgery that I had to have, and how I only had one sinus cavity because the other one was so scarred, and he had no idea what could have ever happened to my sinus cavity, because it looked like surgery had been performed in it. And I was out though, because I had surgery. So he talked to my husband about it. So I have no idea what the doctor had said to my husband. You'd have to talk to him about it because I was out.
Ever have any bloody noses? Wake up with bloody noses, or have them during the day?
I don't remember that, but I know I still sleep sitting up with, I sleep sitting up with two dogs on my bed and my old dog right beside me. I have three big dogs that I sleep with because I'm scared to death. And I used to sleepwalk. My mother would find me sleepwalking all the time.
Now, did she find you sleepwalking, or were you on your way home?
Well, I don't know. She would say that she would find me in her room, and I would go, "Hi, Mom, hi." And I would say, "Why would I be doing that?" And she'd go, "I don't know." And then I'd just lead you right back into your room.
Wow.
I always thought that was weird when she would say that to me. I don't remember it. The man that I took the hypnosis from, he wanted me to continue, but I started getting a little freaked out from what I was seeing. It's very difficult for me to watch. My husband filmed it. He filmed the videos of it. And I watched some of them, and it really freaks me out watching it and listening to them. I don't know if I can continue or if I want to continue, because still pieces come back to me. Like I was saying, songs come back to me from when I was a child, and memories every now and then out of the blue just come back to me. So it's a little frightening to think about continuing, because there might be something that will come back that I don't want to come back.
So when you said you went through hypnosis, obviously none of that was regression hypnosis. It was therapeutic only, correct?
That's why I went, because when my mother told me that it really did happen after she told me it didn't happen, she brainwashed me to think it didn't happen, and then she tried to brainwash me back into thinking that it did happen. And I said, whoa, I have to go to a professional now, because you've got me so confused. I don't know whether I'm coming or going.
Right.
So I had to go to a post-traumatic stress disorder specialist. And this guy works with soldiers and police officers. This guy is a professional. I had to go. I was traumatized twice. I was traumatized when it happened, and then I was traumatized again by my parents after they told me, actually 3 times. I was traumatized when they told me that it didn't happen when I knew it did happen. And then the 3rd time when they told me, oh, we lied to you because it really did happen. So really, I was traumatized 3 times.
And the next morning when we got into the diner we opened it, maybe 7 o'clock or so. There we were, man, on the radio, and other people were calling in about what had happened and what they saw, and it was heard throughout the diner. And a lot of the kids that we went to school with, their parents were in there and having coffee, and being that this wasn't the first incident, it kind of put a bow around the sightings. I mean, it kind of solidified, everything that our family had been talking about in that diner for 3 to 4 years earlier, because this was not the first time we had seen something in the area. But that's pretty much what happened in '69.
Tom, one thing that you mentioned that you didn't bring up again and made me wonder, and I've been wondering for a few weeks now, has your brother ever told this story? I don't know anything about your family. I'm just wondering if anybody else, your brother or anybody else have brought it up and have told that.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
We talked about it all our whole lives.
Right.
I mean, we talked about it in the diner. I mean, and it's not a story, it's history. And it went before the United Nations, for God's sakes.
Yeah,
I mean, it was
right.
given a high classification. It was witnessed by over 250 people. I mean, it's our case that made United States history. I mean, it was inducted
Absolutely.
into my father was later on, in the 80s, my father was approached by Robert Bletchman, an attorney out of Manchester, Connecticut. And he had been, invited, I guess, to speak at a symposium at the United Nations on October 2nd, 1992, with Mohammed Rabidin, who was the president of the Parapsychology Society. And being that my father was, in office or just out of office, he was an acting mayor in Canaan, Connecticut, an attorney. They wanted to reference our family's incident, I guess, because of the water, the bridge and the water,
Right.
Housatonic River, and the water and the, over the, the Hudson River Valley sightings were, making a lot of news and press at the time in the 80s. So, of course, Robert was like, hey, there's a connection here. They're both over water. They're stones throw away from each other. You're a pillar in the community, that kind of thing. Would like to be able to mention your case in support of Cash and Landerman and the Hudson River Valley cases.
Wow.
And it went before the UN. Stanton Friedman was there. Linda Morton Howe was there. Of course, a lot of documentation came back. Our case went in support of GA 33426, which is what's in the Roswell Museum. It has been for a long time that our case was in support of that. Like a bill, I guess, an idea that all the countries would share their UFO information together. And it was first discussed at the UN in 1974. So this was a second attempt to get it passed. And it was like 10 days before SETI was launching their new microwavable technology. So it was a good time to talk about it, And of course, with the Hudson River Valley cases being in all the papers, it was just, one of those, hey, this is the best time to do it. Let's just bring it up. And of course, that same, October 2nd was the same date that my father lost his life. And so that's kind of what got people interested in our case again, because my father was actually really advocating the case in Sheffield, not just because it happened and he knew it, but because my mother got a lot of grief and in the restaurant and diner, and my brother and I got a lot of crap in school. And so he said when the time was right, he would, mention it or do something with it, and he kept his word. And, there's a good chance that was how and why he lost his life. And so with that, I had been at the governor's mansion with him. He would talk to the governor. I'd be in the kitchen with a maid having coffee. But, he was very good friends with Governor O'Neill, and Senator Christopher Dodd was a big supporter of my dad when he ran for office. And so with his friends, I guess, in those circles, and my mom's, interest in politics too, for all the right reasons, the governor of Massachusetts and the Historical Society and a lot of those other people that came forward, many of them, again, were those kids in our diner that rode their bike to school with us, and my mother gave quarters to drop in a jukebox. They were now historians. They were now pillars in the community, many of them. One is Judge Titus from Canaan. And so there was a little bit of a push and an interest to do something in light of, the loss of my father and what it means to the community, and how were they going to, what could they possibly do, right? So back in 2014, I got a call from the Historical Society and with an interest to do something with it, And the more information I sent them, the more they looked into it. Of course, they contacted the radio station that broadcasted it and spoke to a lot of locals, and the Galatas, who were pillars in the community too, were witness to it, and so many people. I mean, it was crazy. And so at that point, it was a matter of, hey, will Tom take a polygraph test? And I took it, I passed it, and of course, there's some medical records, and there were a lot of questions, details I had to fill out, and of course, I got a lot of support from a lot of people in the community. And the Roswell Museum, their research center, had investigated it for years, and the incident was in the Roswell Museum. And so with that, it was simply came down to let's put it to a vote. There's a census that needs to be taken, and so the question was, did our family's incident and the diner alter the natural progression of the community? And if it did, just like Billy the Kid altered the railroad, if it divided the community and altered the natural progression of the community, the incident as a whole was true. And therefore, they could induct it into history or induct it as an historically true event. And so with that, the Historical Society was able to move forward. And of course, they needed someone to rubber stamp it, so they weren't the only ones with their head hanging out there. And so I went to the governor's office to get a that rubber stamp or that approval from the higher ups. And of course, we got not only one citation, but we were given two. And just to clarify something, a lot of people say, oh, the first one was written with an error. Well, the first citation we got was written with an error. It didn't have a date of incident. So it was reissued 3 or 4 weeks later by the governor and the lieutenant governor themselves. And of course, then that was sealed by a judge so that, it could never be refuted or what have you. So that's it in a nutshell.
Tom, I'm going to get to Jennifer in just a second here, but do you recall any other events in the history of the U.S., and maybe Jennifer could jump in on this, that have been deemed historical by a state, federal agency, a county, or anyone or anybody ever?
No, we're the first and only. This is the first and only case to be deemed historically true in America. As crazy as that sounds, it's true.
Well, it's not crazy, and when I use the word story, it's only because history is a story, and that's the root of the word, and it's an accurate narrative.
Actually, believe it or not, the word story means for entertainment purposes,
or knowledge or inquiry, and letting us be the judge. So, not that I'm judging you, because I'm on your side 100%. Let me ask Jennifer a question. Jennifer, what intrigues you about this account? And I'm able to actually see Jennifer, and I can see her writing. Is there anything that you can add that we don't normally get to hear about when hearing about that night in 1969 or other accounts that happened in the past or more recently?
Well, I think one thing that usually comes up is that when people find out where the Berkshires is in the country, it's the westernmost part of Massachusetts. We're really rural. People ask why something like this would happen here. And I think one thing that people don't realize is that while we're known for our culture right now, in the present day, that the Berkshires really was a manufacturing center, especially in the 60s. General Electric was located throughout the county, and Sprague Electric was here, and a lot of the space program was happening here. In the late 50s, GE had a contract, an $83 million contract, in 1957 dollars, with the United States Air Force to produce what would become the Atlas guidance system. And that is what brought the space program into space. Those were the rockets and the guidance system. And Sprague was manufacturing products that were used on the Gemini, the Mercury, and the Apollo systems. And Sprague Electric was a company in North Adams, which is about an hour north of where Sheffield is. But one thing people really don't know is that Sprague Electric was involved in putting together the moon wafer, which was a small silicon disk with messages from 74 heads of state that was left on the moon in July of 1969.
6 weeks earlier.
So let me just read into this just a bit. So would those technology interests be an interest for beings interested in technology, i.e., beings of higher technology? Do you think that would be a draw? That because I mean, people have said, and I've had people that have worked in nuclear missile silos, and you can name it, nuclear power centers. They've had the same experiences. So, Jennifer, what's your thought there?
You're putting me on the spot, but I would say that if
I love it though,
higher life forms or aliens were looking for a place to look at, and they were looking at places that were developing technology, that they would look at this area. Especially this area has always been involved heavily in military contracts. We still have them here in our area. But Sprague Electric developed the triggers that set off the nuclear bombs, the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
And just to piggyback with that, in Canaan, which is only about 3 or 4 miles away, is where the magnesium was mined for the atom bomb. And Sprague, the CEO, I guess, or the president of Sprague, also had an interest in the phenomenon long before the wafer was even manufactured. And there was meetings at Jug Inn Resort in '66, I guess, where there's an article that I'll let Jennifer comment on that. So you had a lot of sightings prior to '69. You had a lot of government manufacturing facilities in the area, from GE to Sprague to Command Aerospace to Pratt and Whitney to there's others, I'm sure, Sikorsky, Electric Boat, the Groton Naval Base, the nuclear. There was a Yankee atomic plant that was there. You got the NORAD towers, Nike missile sites, Minutemen missile sites, and this property or this land in the area, I think, sits something like 1,800 feet above sea level. So you've got all the stuff in the mountains, And something else that I want to mention too is that a lot of the children's parents, they worked for these manufacturing facilities. So when they saw something or saw a UFO in the area, like many of them did, like Melanie, they were basically reprimanded for talking about it, because it was more, in my eyes and some others, I'm not saying factually, but it's the general synopsis, I guess, that because their parents were working on secret programs for NASA, having their children running around saying they're seeing UFOs was something that could get their father or mother fired. So there was, again, a secrecy, with the children, and a secrecy with the parents, yet it was all happening. So a lot of people say, oh, we never talked about it back in the day. Well, it's not really true. Our restaurant was like the spot for everyone to talk about whatever they wanted to. Just like, in church, you could say I'm having a conversation with God, but you don't talk about that in aisle 3 at Walmart, right? So there's a right and wrong place to talk about it. And our diner seemed to have been that place. And again, the classification that came out, which gave our sighting a CE1 classification, came from Jug Inn Resort. And I think Jennifer could fill you in on what was happening at Jug Inn Resort.
Well, let me go a little bit deeper for Jennifer too, because Jennifer, talk about that. But who brought these companies to Massachusetts in the early '60s, late '50s?
Well, actually, R.C. Sprague actually was from Quincy, Mass., and he moved to North Adams because of the size of the industrial complexes that existed here. They were manufacturing parts, and we had a lot of older textile mills that were now empty. But GE came in with Westinghouse and Stanley. They lived here.
But you had some powerful political influencers there too, or one in particular, or two in particular, or a family in particular. And I'm talking about the Kennedys because they were instrumental in bringing a lot of these big businesses to your state.
Oh yeah, the Kennedys. We've had the Vanderbilts that lived out here.
Exactly.
The Rockefellers were located here. We had summer homes for all these people. So
Right.
Yeah,
And then,
it's not unusual for me to know of people that live here. We have a lot of celebrities that live here. A lot of former political people.
now, can you tell them a little bit about RC and what that was about?
Robert C. Sprague was a former naval officer who was an undersecretary appointed by Eisenhower. His father, Frank Sprague, was a business associate of Edison. And he was an inventor, and he was very interested in space and the space program. He, at one point, was a delegate appointed by NASA to a conference to talk about the peaceful uses of space. And so he had direct connections with NASA, which led to his company developing things for the space program.
Which was left on the moon.
Yeah, the wafer that was left on the moon.
Yeah. And then you had, was it Raymond E. Fowler? Can you talk a little bit about what he was doing at Jug End, which is where our Kinet classification was issued?
Oh, so in 1966, there was a Massachusetts Town Clerks Conference, and their invited guest at the resort was Raymond E. Fowler. Raymond E. Fowler at the time was... sorry. Oh,
okay.
He was a project engineer at Sylvania Electric in Waltham, but he was also the chairman of the Mass Investigations Subcommittee for National Investigations on Aerial Phenomenon. And today he's mostly known as an author and authority on UFOs in New England.
And so this is where this all starts to take this. I think there's a lot of unbelievable, there's this web, right? This unbelievable web of different things that were happening in the area. So you had meetings with NICAP at Jug End in 66. Now here's the other thing. This took place in September. The 66 sightings in the Berkshires were in September. The 67 sightings were seen in September. The one that made history was in September 1st. The crop circles that showed up in 2013 were in September. The crop circles that showed up in 2014 were in September. And there were also other crop circles that showed up in and around the Berkshires. And I think, Jen, you know where those were, right? What was that town again?
Palmer, Mass.
Palmer, Mass. And do you know what years that was? What year that was?
I don't know the specific year. I think it was in the mid-2000s.
Yeah. And so you had all this happening around you. You had parents working at these labs and the nuclear power plant and all this stuff that was, the place was just swarming with, these military manufacturing facilities. So back in the day, just to clarify a little bit here, it was never an issue or a concern or a thought or a question that these kids were seeing something in the skies. They were seeing something. It was simply a matter of what was it, more than, is it something? It was more of what are you seeing? And so I think that's kind of why very early on there was no question that something was happening in the area. I just think people had a different opinion of what it was. And when you started pushing too hard and saying, well, these are, UFOs and blah, 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 there was a lot of blowback because of that, because a lot of the parents were working for these larger military manufacturing facilities.
One thing, too, let me just throw this in. as far as news in your part of the world at that time and place, worldwide, the world was crazy. And also in July of that year, Chappaquiddick happened. So in Massachusetts. So that was a big deal. So that was in the news. And that actually, the investigation and everything else that went along with that was a huge story for such a long time that was on the front page of every paper there. So obviously this was something that at that time, I'm not saying it was played second place to anything that was going on in that state at that time or that year, but so many things that happened in the Kennedys were a big thing and always in the news for no matter what they did. So that particular incident really overshadowed just about anything. So it's no wonder that it didn't get the notice it deserved at that particular time. I think that's my opinion.
Well, we didn't even have a newspaper back then, and something else. We didn't even have a radio station. If you wanted to listen to music, you had to go to my family's diner and drop 25 cents in the jukebox because the only station
for one song, Tom.
No, I think it was 3.
There we go. I was going to say that was a crime. Yeah. Okay, that's good. You guys are awesome. I love you more than ever. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, my mother actually owned was old Wurlitzer, so she actually would give the kids the quarters, take out the quarters, and just rotate it. It wasn't like they actually really had to pay for it. My mom wanted to listen to music too, but it kind of was a fun little spot like that. And I tell you, one of the people that used to come in there, and I don't know if Melanie told you this, but Melanie used to come in our diner before '69.
Right.
And something else I want to mention, and I don't want to take Jennifer's time, but there was a lot of activity happening again prior to '69. Was, in my opinion, it was the incident that kind of put a bow around, the fact that what was being talked about in our diner was finally factually upheld by so many, and with that, '66 was an incident that we talked about a little bit, but at the time we really didn't know what was happening. We didn't really know what to make of it. It was a tough period. It was tough. We were really young. But then when it happened again in '67, my mom was involved in that on Boardman Street, and she was right there. And so that's when my mother, and a single mother at the time, decided to, talk about this or befriend people at the diner. And I think that she really had anticipated maybe a warmer welcome. But, people got kind of cold. They were kind of hard on her, and being that we were out of towners to begin with, and I mean, she was only 27 years old, and had a horse farm and a diner and a gold Mustang fastback, and we're in a town where back then most people were running around with suspenders and beards, and it was a different fish out of water type of thing for her. But that's how she met my dad. Actually, he had stopped in and came to her aid while she was getting swatted on the ass and, made fun of about the UFO thing. And we don't talk about that too much because I don't want to give the area a black eye, but it was just a matter of a couple of people that were doing this, not the whole community. But it was tough for her.
It is what it is. Jennifer, what resources do you think now are available? Is there anything new out there for you to research? And are you hearing more accounts?
I think just in the last couple of years that we've been able to talk more about things like this. I think the government's been more forthcoming. I think people are more accepting. I know just recently, it's funny, Jorinda from the Real Housewives of New York is originally from the Berkshires and has a house here, and she posted on social media a video from her house in Great Barrington. Unusual lights in the sky. And Great Barrington is not that far away from Sheffield. So we still have people who talk about, strange lights in the sky. So it's not unusual to hear it here still. But I really think that with the government putting out those videos, like last year or a year or two ago, from the Navy pilots, I think people have become more...
Tic-tac. Yeah.
willing to talk about things like that or experiences.
So you 1 second, Tom. I'm gonna just
sure.
Jennifer. I'm gonna put Jennifer on the spot. Jennifer, you mentioned the government, and please explain. Are they giving you more information? Are you getting more information?
Not me necessarily.
I'm not going to mention.
The New York Times has asked a lot of questions.
I can see Jennifer. I should probably take her off because I saw your eyes. So, but yeah, I mean the government. You're right. I mean there's things to consider there, and sometimes you got to take it easy and go with the flow. But there is information there, I believe.
Right. I think they've been more forthcoming on the federal level. I think it's a lot harder on the local level because if you look back, information laws were not as strong. They weren't required to keep records the way they are today. So I think that comes into play. And a lot of it was based on institutional knowledge, and those people are gone now.
But you definitely now that you played the game a little bit, when there is information that's available from the government, you know where to go to get that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that answer.
Cut and dry.
So far, that's my favorite. That's my favorite part of the show. I can hear her voice.
Everything else said, that's your favorite.
I mean, no, that's unfair. I don't mean to kid her. But yeah, it's there's information there, and her voice, there was some inflection. Look that word up. So so Tom, they came into the town and they.
I'm losing you. You're cutting it out.
All right, but they came into the town and they pulled out the monument. And that was a huge disappointment. I know people that have followed that for a long time, and it's what's next for that.
Well, let me explain something too, and I want to put it in the form of a question. Okay, hopefully I'll make. Okay, so all right. So in your eyes and your feeling, who put the monument there?
It's the people's monument, and it doesn't matter. I'm not going to name a name, but I mean those people who had experiences there. And one thing that I love to look at is in the newspaper, and it has the monument and that bridge there. I noticed the monument. I see the picture of that bridge, and to me they are one solid piece of history of that town, and I would love to see it there.
Okay,
so why?
Okay, so the monument was not put there by the locals. It was actually put there by Nadine Hollier and the Department of Public Works. And for the life of me, I couldn't understand why they tried to say that I put it there. I had nothing to do with the monument being installed. The only thing and the only reason that I was even in conversation about the monument was because there was a local TV show being shot by New England Legends, by the way, who do great jobs. Jeff Bellinger, great guy. They were the first ones to actually cover the monument being installed. And they were in town. And so the township installed the monument. Not me. No one else but the town. And then they wanted it moved because it was too close to the bridge. And it was the town again who ran the installation through a law firm in Boston, Copeland and Page, and the attorney's name was Mark Reich. And he had been in contact with me because I had to have someone there on my behalf, like someone who was a deputy, so make sure that when the monument was installed, it was level, it wasn't broken, that kind of thing. And so at the time, I had reached out to someone to be there on my behalf. But again, that was installed by the Department of Public Works. And so I think once people complained about it, some people didn't. And remember, this was back in 2015 where monuments were being taken down across the country. And so, there was a question as to why is one going up when all these are coming down, I guess. And then there were some who didn't like the topic or whatever, particular reporter back in the day who was less than honest and writing some things that weren't accurate, which is probably where you read that someone else had put it there other than the town. And then, of course, then it became kind of a tourist attraction, right? People were donating solar lights. Ben Hansen and Travis Walton donated a bench, and the Roswell Museum donated a bench, and Lee Haglin got involved from the X-Files, and wanted to support the park, and Travel Channel, donated money for a bench, and so did others. So it became kind of a popular spot. And I think once it became this somewhat of a tourist attraction, there was this idea of, well, how are we going to get our hands around it? Tom lives 1,000 miles away. It's in our backyard. So there was a lot going on back then, as to where was this going to go and who was going to have control of it. And but now it's I think now we've all kind of in some respects shaken hands and decide to move on, in more of a cordial fashion, cordial manner, if you will, and not get in each other's way. And it's good for the community, and I think they see that. And there's a lot of shows being shot there now. It's bringing opportunities to the community too. So of course that warms hearts. And and it's also an area for people to go and talk. Hey, I saw something. It's you're not going to get questioned or judged there. So it's I was speaking to the chief of police, Eric Munson, and just recently he was like, Tom, this is really good for our community. So with that, coupled with Travel Channel, just filming there with Kathleen Martin and the granddaughter of oh my God, what was it? Not Roosevelt. Oh shoot, I can't think of the name. But Travel Channel did a great job. They also covered a lot of what the role my father had, and how he passed, and how my mother was compensated $25,000 not to go after or pursue his lawsuit and things like that. So, the truth is coming out, and I think it's important that people like Jennifer and the rest of who take this really seriously and for what it's worth to preserve the truth behind it, because it does get turned into a circus a little bit. The shows don't always accurately portray something, or they want to focus on this or focus on that. And then you've got the locals that are going, hey, wait a minute, we were part of this. That's not really what happened, And so that's why I'm very specific or choose my words correctly, because this isn't just about us, it's about a community. It's about thousands of people. And when you've got one or two people that are, heading up the narrative, you have to be accurate. And you don't want to embarrass people, or you want to support the community and preserve this for the modern day history that it is.
When people have gone through this, when you go to sleep at night, wake up in the morning and notice some subtle changes in whatever, in your life, your body, your room, it could be anything. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What happened during the night?
Always. I am so in tune to everything.
Right.
In fact, my husband always, he always, he'll say to me, they call me Nina. It's a nickname of mine. Ask Nina. She knows. She's on to this. She'll figure it out. She always knows what's going on, because I'm intuitive. I know these things. And with animals, I can see things. I just have this intuition. It's almost like a gift that I have. I guess I could look at it like a gift.
Well, I think you start looking at your own life really, really close, because you want to make sure that, if something's going to happen, whether it did happen, whether it didn't happen. Hopefully that you could remember some detail. And then, in my mind, it would be like you're trying to figure this out so you maybe could prevent it in the future. So that's the first step in being intuitive, is to pay very close attention to your surroundings and remember what that is, and remember what those feelings mean and what they stand for.
Right. It's not always a good gift, though.
No. No way.
Because it can hold you back on some things, too. Because you're always on guard. You're always on guard. Because you can see things before they happen at times.
Yeah.
So you don't take dares like other people would. Let me put it that way. It's made me to become a very cautious person of people, my surroundings, and for instance, I have to be careful. I have to be very careful.
Yeah.
I just don't trust. I don't have the trust factor because you don't know. Anything can happen in a moment. It's just a scary world out there.
Yeah, it
Scary
is.
world.
And
I've met a lot of good people through all of this, but at the same time, it's a scary world out there.
so what would you like to happen in the future? I mean, obviously that there are people there in the town that are opening up. You're making new contacts. Do you want to just forget about it, or do you want to hear other stories and try to recover in that way or in some other way?
Well, for one thing, I think that parents need to listen to their children when they start talking about when they see something, whether it be a ghost, whether it be UFOs. They need to listen to their children, because why would people want to make this stuff up? That's one thing I did say. Both Henry, my husband, and I said, I refuse to do any of this for financial gain. I refuse to be paid for any of this because it's never been my motive. I do not want any money for any of this because this is all about history, historical, and it's sharing a story of something that happened for me. I don't ever want a cent for any of this. It's the truth. It's all about telling the truth. I know that some people are making money off of this. I don't ever want a penny for any of my story. That's not what this is about for me. It never was. It never will be. And that's my truth. And I think it's sad if people ever thought that it would be, because that's not what it's about for me.
Sure.
And I really wish that people would learn to listen to their children, because too often they're told, oh, it's an imaginary friend, or it's quick to put them on an antidepressant, or, just poo-poo them and send them to bed and not listen to their story, because you don't know. It could be the truth that they're telling you, and you can mess them up even more by not listening to them. So I think you need to listen to your children a little bit more and spend some time with them.
So do you think this is a spot in our world that this keeps happening even today?
I do, and I think that we need to treat our animals better, and I think we need to treat Mother Earth better. I think we need to listen to the First Nations people a little bit more. I think we need to study them a little bit more and respect them more.
Are these visitors from another time, another world, do you feel? And is that message ultimately to save us? And if so, why would they even want to consider us worth it?
I think that some of them could be. I don't think that all of them, but I think some of them could be. I'm still looking into it. I'm never going to give up doing the research. But I think that, like I said, I think that the First Nations people know more about it than we do. And I think that we've disrespected them. And I think that maybe if we open our minds up a little bit more, we could learn from them. We could learn from the First Nations people more. They're very spiritual people, and we need to study it more. And we haven't. We've just taken it all for granted, and we just continue to destroy everything that we have. It's such a beautiful world out there, and all we do is continue to destroy it.
Do you think there's any hope of putting it all back together again? Because obviously the world looks vastly different than it did even 100 years ago. So, what's your vision, and how can we do that?
I have no, it's so sad. It's so sad. I look at the world. I'm 63 years old. I'm going to be 64. And, you know, I used to have a place myself down in Negril, Jamaica, and I go back there now. I had a place down there over 20 some years ago when there were just horses living in the center of town. And now it's all these huge hotels along 7 Mile Beach. And it breaks my heart because there's nothing left down there anymore except for these giant hotels. And that's in just a short time. The beach has shrunk. There's nothing left down there. And I love it. Don't get me wrong. It's like my home away from home still. But there's nothing left because of the beach erosion, because of these giant hotels. And we keep doing it. And we're doing it all over the world, everywhere you go, in Belize, in Mexico. We just keep building and building and building, and we don't stop. And it's all about money. Everything's about money. Cha-ching, cha-ching. We just keep doing it. We just want to keep putting more money in our pockets. And it's just so sad that we're doing this. And I think it's a warning.
Yeah. So I think we all need to agree that we're going to get our you-know-what together and make a difference no matter what it takes because, one day this big globe will be gone, but I think we'll be gone a lot sooner than it will. So we're just here for a short time, and we're not making the best of it. But Melanie, I'd like to thank you so much. You've been an absolute delight. I can't even imagine that I would have talked to you 2 years ago, and it's just a real special time for me, and I'm so grateful you were able to have this time and talk about something that's so amazing.
Thank you, Cam.
There's a lot of reasons for how this happened, and it's very involved. There's a lot of moving parts here, and we're kind of grateful that there are, and I'm really grateful for Jennifer and others to speak up on this too, because this is more than just, hey, I was hit by a beam of light. There's no secret UFOs are out there, but when you've got a case that has the support that this one does, you got to move forward carefully, if that makes sense.
Well, in my mind, too, and I think it's a beautiful spot, and I love the idea of the benches, and even if they don't put the monument back, it's still an amazing spot. And the way I picture it, I'm sure is totally different. And when I visit there in person, which I can't wait to do, I'm sure it's spectacular. But Jennifer, what do you see coming up next for you? I mean, you know the legacy of the town, you know the legacy of the people. I know you're not in there to put your name at the forefront of this institution and what happened there, but what would you like to see and what would you like to see happen? Because this was an event that was very important to a lot of people, and not just the handful that have spoken out so far, more than a handful.
I think the park is really beautiful, and I've met some interesting people there, and I think it's great that people are coming together to talk about things that haven't been talked about in a long time. I really want to see a more open conversation in our communities about different things. And if it has to start with something as simple as people talking about experiences they had with the UFOs or the paranormal to get us to talk about bigger things that are happening nationally, then I think that's great. I just think we need to be more honest as a society.
Exactly. And Tom, as a final thought, do this for me as a way of launching conversation into a new era of your hometown, yourself, and the experience. Give us one final thought.
Okay. a lot of people ask me why. Why did this happen? Well, I can tell you this. 9 of us in our family are Rh negative. Now, O negative blood back in the 60s was also the only blood type tracked by the U.S. government because we were the universal donors. And we were surrounded by government or manufacturing facilities and so on. So when we were there, born there, whatever, we were tracked from day one. Now, I also look at our Earth as a whole. We have had, 6 or 7 complete global extinctions or close to it. Yet we have 8 million species here today. So that means that to have survived, there had to be couples, right? It had to be relatively close to one another to have ever run into each other, and of opposite sex. And if there was only a couple, then every animal on this planet would have been inbred. So it seems to me that to have 8 million species thriving after 7 extinctions, this planet was pretty well planned out and populated purposely. Now our planet rotates on a unique axis. We have brackish water, fresh water, saltwater, desert, rainforests, you name it. So we can house millions of species simultaneously in exactly the right climate to be conducive for their survival. So when we see UFOs or what have you, they've been here forever. We didn't evolve here. We were brought here. Earth is our galaxy's arc.
Excellent. Jennifer, one final thought.
You really like putting me on the spot.
There's no wrong answer. I like what you have to say.
I'm just, I think if more people look to our history, they can find a lot of things that are happening now in the world happened before. And I think this is just one example of people experiencing a phenomenon, but this time they're more willing to talk about it. I think there's a lot of things people don't know about their own local areas, and if they take the time to do a little research or just visit their local history museum, they'll find something really interesting, like a silicon disc that was manufactured at their local plant where their grandparents worked, and they'll find a great story about how that ended up on the moon, because that's how I first got involved with that story.
These children of the 60s, they had no idea that collectively they were going to, never waver, right? They never wavered in what they said, but collectively, these children in our diner, these children from Sheffield, this tiny little town of Sheffield, collectively, they made United States history. And they should be, proud and feel privileged for what they did and what they had to offer. Like Jennifer was alluding to, not everyone's proud of their history, We're not celebrating, Jack the Ripper, right? This is a pioneering form of history. In this small little town of all these kids who rode their little banana seat bikes to and from school from our diner, collectively made history together. And like Jennifer was saying, I think that if we look at our history, we look at the history in Sheffield and Great Barrington, there's a lot here, from this wafer being developed to, how that possibly triggered an invasion, right? So, and not only that, there's a lot of other history there as well, but she's right. This is a form of history, and I think maybe we just all need to relax, realize that this is a new time, and not be afraid to embrace the history we made, or through a relative or son or daughter, but to really take a look at what this means for the community, and just be a little more open about it. And if I don't think it challenges religion or anything. I think we're all just part of a bigger picture, and it's time we realize that.
You said invasion, man.
I had to, man, because I talked about it earlier.
I'm going to start the show with those words. No, I'm not.
Hey, man.
Yeah, I know. But so there's little doubt You both are amazing. I'm speechless. So here's my final thought. Tom and Jennifer, myself and my listeners will see you as part of our American history. And guess what? It's on paper. So never forget that and keep the legacy of the Berkshires alive, and I promise to do the same. Thank you so much for the conversation that no one can deny it happened. It's real. Thank you so much. I love you both.
Thanks for having me, man. Take care. Thank you.
Good night, everybody. You can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The music you are hearing is produced and created by Elion. You can find all Elion's work online at Heart Dance Records.